Hi, my name is Helger Lipmaa. I come from Simula UIB in Norway, and I am going to give a presentation based on my paper Key and Argument Updatable NIZKs that was accepted to the virtual conference SEN 2020. So, a short reminder about the setting. We are interested in something that is called non-interactive zero-knowledge proof, where there is one prover and possibly many verifiers. Prover has an input X that supposedly belongs to some language L. For example, X is a composite number, and then he has corresponding witness that proves that X belongs to L. For example, the factorization of this composite number. The prover, given X and W, construct a short argument pi and then publishes it. And then many different verifiers can download the argument together with the input and then check in private whether X belongs to language given the argument as the kind of a proof. Important thing is that verifiers do not know the witness. A non-interactive zero-knowledge proof is supposed to be correct, which means that if X belongs to the language, then honest verifier accepts. It is supposed to be sound, which means that if X does not belong to the language, then honest verifier does not accept. And zero-knowledge, which captures the intuition that the argument should not reveal any extra information about the witness. And an important property that we are also interested in is efficiency. Basically, we are mostly interested in NIZK arguments where the argument itself is very short. To explain why we are interested in updatable NIZKs, let us consider how usually zero-knowledge property is proven. So, we have, as before, we have a prover and verifier, and prover sends the argument that depends on the witness to the verifier. Now we want to prove that the argument does not reveal anything about the witness. The simplest way and the most logical way of doing it is to show that one can construct pi without actually knowing the witness. So a very standard cryptographic proving technique is to assume the existence of a simulator. The simulator only knows the input. Based on input, generates a simulated argument and sends that to the verifier. And the requirement is that the simulated argument should not be distinguishable from the real argument. If we can do that, then obviously nothing about witness is revealed by the argument. Unfortunately, this is impossible, because if such a simulator existed, then as a prover could generate proof without knowing the witness. So, this situation is unfortunately impossible. To make it possible, we have to give simulator some extra power, and the most standard way of doing it is to assume that simulator knows something that the prover does not. Let's say prover only knows public key, but the simulator knows the corresponding secret key. This is usually formalized as the common reference string model, the CRS model, where there is a honest, trusted third party who is trusted to generate a CRS, kind of a public key, send it to both prover and verifier. Prover and verifier act as previously, except they take this CRS as a part of their inputs. And then the simulator is given access to the trapdoor, the secret key, and simulator uses this extra knowledge to simulate the argument. And now simulation is definitely possible if you construct a clever enough argument system. So this CRS model is very standard and very well known. It was first proposed in late 80s, and it assumes the existence of an universally trusted CRS creator. The CRS model has at least two benefits. One of them is that it avoids the impossibility results, so it actually makes simulation possible. And the second one is efficiency. You can kind of think that CRS encodes the circuit that prover and verifier are interested in. So CRS does some kind of a pre-computation is involved in the CRS. And this is what allows for those very efficient zero-knowledge proofs where the argument is really, really very short and the verification time is sublinear. Unfortunately, the CRS model also has several drawbacks. So the most important one is obviously the trust. Why should everybody trust the CRS creator? And this is not clear at all in practice, because in many situations, like let's say blockchain, there's no party that all the users would trust. So that said, here is an overview of the recent advances in the case of ZK-SNARKs, succinct non-interactive arguments of knowledge that are extremely popular, mostly but not only because of their potential applications in blockchains. So the traditional ZK-SNARKs work in the CRS model. The first contemporary ZK-SNARK was proposed by Crott in 2010. They have a CRS where everybody trusts the CRS. And the newest SNARKs in the CRS model are extremely efficient. It is also known that you can do such SNARKs, but you actually need non-black box assumptions to prove soundness. The next step forward, I would say, is the so-called subversion zero-knowledge or the bare public key model that was first proposed by me and co-authors in Asia Group 2017 and then improved by several other authors. In this model, the prover is not required to trust the CRS, but verifier is. So this is an important relaxation because, for example, you can think that the CRS was generated by V, who is the party who needs to trust it. Efficiency-wise, subversion zero-knowledge almost doesn't involve any penalties. Basically, all efficient SNARKs in CRS model are also secure in this weaker bare public key model. Unfortunately, in this case, it is known that non-black box assumptions are known both for soundness and zero-knowledge. An even newer model is called Updatable SNARKs. It was proposed by Crott, Kohlweiss and co-authors in 2018. And in this case, prover again doesn't have to trust the CRS or the CRS generator. The CRS is updated sequentially by many different parties, and the verifier has to trust only one of the updater. Let's say it can be the case that one of the updaters is the verifier itself. In this case, you get efficiency for the whole NP, but it is not as efficient as the previous versions. So there is a noticeable penalty in the efficiency. And assumption-wise, obviously, you need non-black box assumptions for both soundness and zero-knowledge. In this paper, I'm interested in another type of NIZK that is called quasi-adaptive. I will call it KNIZK. KNIZK has several interesting pros and cons compared to SNARKs. One pro is that it's super efficient for a restricted class of languages. So you can prove stuff about linear subspaces, and the argument length is just one group element. Another pro is that KNIZK is based on standard assumptions. You do not need non-falsifiable or non-black box assumptions here. You can just use even, let's say, DDH or even CDH to construct KNIZKs. Unfortunately, KNIZKs have also several drawbacks. One of them is what the meaning of this QA, quasi-adaptive, is that the CRS depends on the language parameter, LPAR. The language parameter is usually assumed to be trusted. You can think of it as let's say, an Helger public key, and the KNIZK proves some property related to this public key. Let's say it proves that the encryption under this public key is of plaintext 0. This restricts somewhat the model. Moreover, for wider class of languages, KNIZKs are not so efficient. So we know how to construct KNIZKs for circuit verifiability, but they are not succinct. Still, independently of those drawbacks, KNIZKs have many applications. So it has separate applications in encryption, signature schemes, etc., where it's really important that the output is just one group element and you just are basing it on standard assumptions. As maybe more interesting from my side point of view is that KNIZKs can be used as building blocks of SNARKs. And if KNIZK has some property, let's say KNIZK is updatable, then you might also get an SNARK that has the same property. I'm not going to discuss SNARKs anymore. The rest of this presentation is about KNIZKs. So what is a KNIZK? KNIZK is a NIZK where you just have this additional language parameter. So usually you think that there's some party that generates the language parameter. This party is again usually trusted. This language parameter is now given to the CRS generator, who generates CRS based on this language parameter. Let's say language parameter is Helger public key. The CRS is some function of this public key. And then you have the same situation as before, except that all parties get the language parameter as an input. And as I mentioned, the fact that we have this quasi-adaptiveness enables us to get improved efficiency. There are KNIZKs for linear subspaces where the argument length is just one group element, while the best known adaptive NIZKs for the same language have linearly long arguments. In the case of KNIZKs, we have a similar history, but just everything has been happening a bit later. There was first a KNIZK for linear subspaces in the CRS model, where everybody trusts both the language parameter and public key or CRS generator. Those schemes are efficient for linear languages and less efficient for NP. But like I said, the assumptions are black box. Then this year at BKC, we proposed a subversion zero knowledge version of KNIZKs. Or it's maybe better to call it a bare public key model, as I will do in the next. Instead of CRS, I will talk about public key. So CRS is the public key, and then in addition of it, you have language parameter. So in this case, you need to trust or the verifier needs to trust the PK generator, the efficiency is the same. In the case of soundness, you can use black box assumptions, but to prove zero knowledge, you need non-black box assumptions. And this is also, it is known that this is needed. In this work, we propose updatable NIZK, where the verifier only trusts one PK updater and the prover doesn't have to trust anybody. And the nice thing is that we basically don't have to modify existing constructions. We can just take the most efficient existing NIZK by Kiltz and V, add some procedures to it, but basically everything will be as efficient as before. The prover is not modified, the verifier is not modified, etc. And the security assumptions basically will not change either. So to explain what is meant by updatable snarks, recall that in common non-updatable snarks, you have a trapdoor or a secret key, which is a vector of uniformly random integers, and the public key contains the evaluation of some well-known circuit-dependent functions at this vector of the trapdoors. And I denote it by brackets, so it's all those elements are given as exponents. In the case of updatable snarks, you have two different CRSs or public keys. The first one is a universal public key, which is as in the case of non-updatable ZK snarks, but here this polynomial set does not depend on the concrete circuit. It might depend on the circuit size. And then when you have this CRS, you can verifiably specialize this public key or CRS to a concrete circuit. This is very important in practice because you do not want to generate a new CRS from scratch each time when you change the circuit. Let's say in the case of blockchain, or let's say Zcash, if you change the protocol, the circuit changes. You do not want to start doing everything from scratch. You would like to use some kind of a trust that you have already in the system, and then you have this universal public key and you specialize it to the new circuit. So how is updating done in more details? You have a universal public key that corresponds to some initial choice of the trapdoors, and then you have multiple updaters who update this public key. They take the trapdoors and they implicitly change the trapdoors so that the new trapdoors will contain randomness chosen by the new updaters. And then you have a universal public key after k-1 updates. This is given to the specializer who computes the corresponding special public key, a specialized public key that corresponds to the concrete circuit. And then this public key is used to generate an argument about this concrete circuit by using the current version of the trapdoors. After that, you might have one more updater that updates the public key, the universal public key, by adding his own randomness. And now the nice thing is that this updating of the public or the universal public key can be used also to update the specialized public key, because in those NARCs the specialization actually does not involve any trapdoors. It can be done in public. And then, given the new specialized public key, you can compute a new proof about your input by using the new trapdoor. However, the new argument, new proof, is not related to the old one. You have to do it from scratch by using the witness again. So while you can update the public key, each time when you update the public key, you have to compute a new argument. So while updating public key is a very nice property, the question is, can we actually also update the argument? And yeah, so you can continue updating even after that. You update the universal and specialized public key, etc., etc. And now one detail is that, for example, this last argument, PC of xk, this is sound if at least one of the first k updaters was honest. Then in this original paper of Grott, Kohlweiss, etc., it was also shown that updatability is only possible if the public key consists of monomials of the trapdoor vector. And this gives us many limitations, because in most of the existing snarks or CONISCs, this is not the case. So what are the security goals? The specialized public key has to be updatable publicly. The universal public key creation and update should be efficiently verifiable. And verification should basically tell you that the creation corresponds to some choice of the public key, and the update corresponds to some choice of the delta of the trapdoors. And specialization and creation kind of do not involve any trust. Moreover, you get that if one updater is honest, then the corresponding trapdoor after k updates is uniformly random. And this suffices to get soundness. Our observation is that for this you need that the distribution of the secret key belongs to a generalized ideal of a convolution semigroup, which we call a nice distribution. In the case of snarks, you have multiplicative updates. So in the case of those existing non-updatable snarks, as I said, public key is equal to the evaluation of some polynomials at the trapdoor vector in exponents. And you do multiplicative update. You basically choose new random secret keys, or not secret keys, but deltas of the trapdoors, and you implicitly multiply each trapdoor with corresponding delta. And this can be used efficiently to update polynomials. And the impossibility result of Grott, etc., says that non-monomials cannot be updated by using multiplicative updating. And this has resulted in a flurry of research in snarks where public key consists of only monomials. So what are our results? I will not have much time left, so I will just very briefly describe what we achieved, and for the rest, please check the paper. So we construct an updatable version of Gilt's V CONISC. This is the most efficient existing CONISC where the argument length is just one group element. We have an extra property in the case of updatability, namely we can actually update the arguments. So when we update public key, we can update the argument together with it. And the resulting argument looks exactly like a fresh argument with this new public key. You cannot distinguish an updated argument from a fresh argument. And this, I think, gives a lot of interesting applications that can be seen from the paper. We also give corresponding security definitions, and we have a very different updating strategy because GILTS-V CRS does not consist of monomials. So we cannot do multiplicative update. We have to do something else. So very briefly, what we do is that we divide the GILTS-V public key into two parts. One of them is a matrix in exponents, which is a universal Kerr-MDH matrix that does not depend on anything conisk related at all. It does not depend on the size of or the dimension of the subspace. It doesn't depend on the length of the circuit. It is a universal matrix that can be used anywhere where we are interested in having a Kerr-MDH matrix, not only in conisks. And I think this is an important difference because in the case of updatable snarks, you have still some dependency of the universal CRS, at least on the circuit size. And it's not so obvious that you can use the same updatable universal CRS in other applications. Here you can. You just have a matrix that is Kerr-MDH secure, and you can basically reuse it everywhere. And then on top of it, you have a circuit-dependent public key. The matrix A is updated multiplicatively, and by that I mean that it is multiplied by the delta matrix. So it's kind of like matrix multiplication updating, which can also have additions, of course. But then the C-dependent public key is just updated additively. And then we have a generalization. Like I said, we can just update this matrix A in different applications that use Kerr-MDH. Any applications. And each application might have a completely different public key. Not only GILTS-V, but like I said, any other application, they might have their own PK with a very different structure, and they have to deal separately with that. So, to finish off the talk, here is just a picture. So compared to the case of updatable snarks, we have one negative thing, namely updating specialized public keys requires the knowledge of some trapdoor. So this is somewhat weaker. But the stronger thing is that we can also update arguments. And obviously the question is, which model is better? I actually don't think that either of them is better. They are just different. And to be completely honest, I think the models are just motivated by what can be done with a concrete construction. At least that was the case here. It was possible to update arguments, so I did it. The open question, obviously, is to find a model that computes, or find a construct either a conisk or snark that has the positive sides of both of the models. So thank you very much. I am Helger Lipmaa, and that was my talk. If you have any questions, then please ask it virtually during the conference. Thank you. Bye bye.